This is Jaya Peterson-Lent with you. We're just waiting a few more minutes for some additional folks to come on, but you are in the right place, and we'll get started shortly. Thank you. Good morning and good afternoon, depending on where you're calling from. This is Jaya Peterson-Lent with Generations United, and you are at the Intergenerational Advocacy Hill Day Preparation webinar. Welcome. We are going to start with a few housekeeping items, just to make sure you can hear us and are in the right place. To hear the presentation, you can either listen to your speakers or call in through your phone. Either option is available to you, and the call-in information is here on the screen. We will have some Q&A time specifically at the end of the session, but you can ask your questions at any time by typing in the question box on your screen, and that will come through so that we can read your questions at the Q&A time. So feel free to send them along anytime through the presentation, and we will check in and respond to them at the end. Also, we want to let you know that the PowerPoint and this presentation, our words, will be recorded and available on the Generations United website after this presentation, and so you can take a look at that link, and it should be up within the next couple of days. If you want to share this, if you know somebody that had hoped to join but wasn't available to participate in this discussion. So, with that, let's get started. I'm Jaya Peterson-Lent. I'm the Deputy Executive Director here. I think this would be my 6th Hill Day with Generations United. I've been here about 13 years. And I'm joined today by Jessica Smith, who is our public policy intern and is the lead at making sure that folks have all the information they need to schedule our visits. So you'll be hearing from her soon.
Yes, hello everyone. I'm the one that's been sending you all the emails, so thank you for being receptive to those, and I look forward to meeting you all in next month.
Great. So we'll start just to tell you a little bit about what is on the agenda for today's webinar. We're first going to spend just a little bit of time talking about the importance of advocacy. Hopefully, since you've joined up for the Intergenerational Advocacy session and you're participating in this webinar, you are somewhat convinced, but we'll share a little bit more about what research says about why it's important to be doing advocacy. We'll give an overview of Hill Day, the schedule of the day at a glance, and talk a little bit about what to expect. We'll do a brief overview of some of the issues that we suggest you might want to consider talking about in your meetings. We'll talk about what an actual Hill visit looks like. If you've never done one before, sometimes there's some anxiety around meeting with your members of Congress, and so we'll talk a little bit about what to expect. And then Jessica will walk through how to actually go ahead and schedule that visit with your member of Congress or their staff. And then we will have some time for questions at the end. So let's start with the importance of advocacy. Is it important to advocate? The short answer of that, of course, is yes. We do believe that advocacy and communicating with your members of Congress who represent you is foundational to our democracy. And it's very important that they hear from you, particularly in the current climate where there is, of course, a lot of push for austerity and cuts to federal federal investments in young people and older people, it's much easier for members to cut or not be thoughtful about the way policy is made if there's not a face put to the programs that they're working on. So it's very important that you put a face to those programs that they make decisions about every day. We do have some research that I want to highlight you that comes from a group called the Congressional Management Foundation, which recently did a survey of federal staff, so those staff that work in the federal offices, those individuals that you will be meeting with on your Hill visits. And just a couple of highlights there. That research showed that certainly you have a lot of power as a constituent, that members are really influenced by constituents. And they looked at three sort of different categories of ways to influence members. They looked at in-person visits. They looked at things back in the district like town hall meetings or letters to the editor in local papers. And then they looked at old-fashioned snail mail letters and emails. And perhaps not surprisingly, but I want to make sure you're aware of it, in-person visits in their Washington, D.C. office were ranked as the most powerful in terms of influence. So 97% of staff said that constituent visits to Washington have some or a lot of influence, particularly on an undecided member of Congress. And second to that was those meetings actually in the district, which came down to 94%, but still very, very strong influence for those in-person meetings. So of all the ways to advocate, this really ranks way up there. So keep in mind, by scheduling these visits here when you're in Washington, it is a unique opportunity and a very powerful one. It also looked at presenting your opinion or speaking out at a town hall or writing a letter to the editor. And when staffers were asked about those, 87% suggested that town hall meetings were particularly influential, and 80% for those letters to the editor. And then they looked at email and mail, and they saw that it's pretty similar in terms of influence through email and mail communications, snail mail communications. About 90% said it would influence a member through postal mail, and 88% through email. So it's important that whether you can come here to Washington or you stay, or you can't, and you need to communicate in other ways, know that those communications really can make a difference. But being here in Washington, you really are uniquely positioned, particularly as a constituent, to make a difference. And I just want to tell two quick stories. One story speaks more to the mail communication, and that is that I was actually doing some outreach at the state level with an initiative we had a while back, and one local constituent talked about communicating with the state senator's office, and she approached them and said, I want to talk to you about our position on this issue, and we really hope that you will vote with us. And his staffer said, I can't, I'm sorry, I just got an overwhelming number of letters, from the other side saying that we can't support this. And she was in the office and she said, really, who are they from? And that staffer pulled out the envelope where she was keeping those letters, and she had 3 letters in it. And to her, on that issue, that was an overwhelming response. So what's important to know is that while there's certainly some issues that get a lot of attention, there often just are not that many people communicating on certain issues with their members of Congress. So one communication or a couple communications really can make a difference. So keep that in mind. It might think, well, what does my one communication mean? Sometimes that might be all that office has heard from on that issue. And we've had situations where we've talked to staff about an issue, and they say, you know what, our member would like to support you on this, but we haven't heard from a single constituent. So one contact really can make a difference. And on that one person can make a difference note, I want to share a story from a previous Generations United Hill Day. And that was a number of years ago when we were working on some housing legislation for grandparents raising grandchildren. We had one conference attendee who signed up for Hill Day and was trying to schedule his visits, and he just had a really hard time getting through to the office. It was actually Senator Stabenow from Michigan. He contacted that office, and they said, well, we'll get back to you with a time. He was trying to get through to a staffer, and it was just a busy time, and he just couldn't get a meeting during his time here in Washington. But I said, keep trying. He kept calling, and then finally a week later, after calling every day, it's not always this hard, but let me just tell you this story that in this case it proved to be difficult. But after he finally got through and had the meeting with that member, Senator Stabenow ended up becoming our strongest advocate on that housing legislation, and she offered the amendment that eventually was accepted and moved into law for our legacy housing bill. And we really point to that as one of those turning points in terms of his persistence and that leading her to champion an issue. Again, it's not always that hard to get a meeting, but that story I think illustrates that, you know, your individual advocacy really can have an impact. So I wanted to highlight that for you all. Advocacy does matter. So what is the day going to look like, our Hill Day, while you're here? It is the first major day of the conference after the pre-conferences are over. There's a number of opportunities to help you prepare for these meetings beyond this webinar. The first opportunity will come the morning of the 31st. If you would like some additional time to prepare or have some one-on-one time with myself, Jessica, or some other experienced advocates that will be at that breakfast, you can come at 7:30. There'll be information about location in your conference materials. And we will just be talking a little bit about you know, what meetings will look like, and if you just have any individual questions about the issue or what to expect, we'd be happy to talk to you there on an individual basis. Then at 8:30 we have a plenary session that's not specific to Hill Day, but it's called Public Policy and You, and we'll have a number of aging and children's advocates. The head of Social Security will be there to talk a little bit about the current political environment. Then at 9:45 to 11:45 is that Legislative Advocacy Forum. And that's a session where we'll talk some more about the importance of advocacy. We'll have a panel of advocates and Hill staff talking about how to make the most out of a meeting with your member of Congress. We'll walk through some of the suggested talking points that we'll have available for you in your materials. And then we usually have some time to do some role play, so really to practice that meeting with your member of Congress before you actually do it for real. So there's some good time for practice. So you will feel ready for that meeting by the time it happens. Then there's a brief time for lunch. And then ideally, if you're able to schedule your visits between that 1 and 4 o'clock period in the afternoon, you can head over to your visits. And then at any time in that afternoon, we will have a room available that you can stop by and share your experience with us. Talk to us about how your meeting was. We have a form that we like you to fill out so that we know what your conversation has been with your member, and we love to capture those stories. So we do hope you'll stop by that debrief room. Again, information about it will be in your conference materials. So a little bit more about what to expect in the actual visit. A big question we get a lot is, what do I wear? And on this front, what's important is there's two things. First, you should feel something that makes you feel confident, make you feel like you look your best and that you're comfortable in. But in addition to that, I can never emphasize enough that there is a lot of walking when you're moving around Capitol Hill. So I encourage you to wear comfortable shoes. Also know that it can get extremely hot in Washington. Unfortunately, this conference is in July, so it's pretty much the thick of the summer heat. It's humid and hot here often, so wear layers because then the buildings are air conditioned. So keep that in mind. And again, comfortable shoes. It seems like it doesn't matter how often we put this in our materials and we mention it, people say, really, that was a lot of walking. And just, you know, it has to be that way because there's a lot of restrictions for security reasons about where people can drive, and so how far people can go close to the Senate, the Capitol, and the House offices. So just please keep in mind, comfortable shoes is key. What should you bring, and what shouldn't you bring? Well, of course, you will be going through security in both the Senate and the House offices. So think almost like an airport in terms of what you can and can't bring. You know, nothing sharp, no weapons, nothing explosive. None of these should be a real issue. Last I have been through, they did allow water. They made changes, but they do still allow liquids, unlike if you're going in an airplane. So you will get a link in your materials to what is allowed and what isn't allowed, but keep those restrictions in mind. What you should bring, we will give you some materials to leave behind in your visits. If you're doing more than one visit, certainly you want to have information about where you're going, your schedule, when to be where. We certainly encourage you to bring a camera. You can always ask to take a picture in the office with your member or staff, depending on who you're meeting with. And then, you know, think now about if there's something from your program back home, whether it's a picture of some of the kids and seniors that you work with, whether it's a letter to your member from some of them. Think about something that, or just a brochure or some materials from your program back home. Think about some piece that represents your work that you want to bring to leave with staff so that they have something to keep in front of them to be reminded of the importance of your work. Next question, how much time should I allow between visits? Again, it's important to keep in mind that you will be going through security. When you go from building to building within the Senate side, well, let me step back. For those that might not be familiar with the Capitol, the way it's set up is the big Capitol dome is in the middle, and if you're looking at it from the front, to the right are all of the House buildings, and to the left are all of the Senate buildings. So there's 3 House and 3 Senate buildings. So if you are moving from, say, one Senate appointment to another Senate appointment, you don't have to leave security and come back in. You can go from one building to the next right there. So in terms of if you're going between one Senate meeting to another Senate meeting, you could leave just about 15 minutes in between visits. But if you're crossing from the Senate to the House or the House to the Senate, you're going to want to give yourself at least 30 minutes because you have to exit security and walk across all the way past the dome across the Capitol to the other side. So keep that timing in mind. But if you have questions about it, again, Jessica, who will speak soon, would be happy to answer some of those. And then finally, will I see my member of Congress? We hope so. They are expected to be in town, although it may be coming pretty close to the end where they'll be going out for recess. But at this point, we do expect members to be here. We encourage you, when you schedule your visit, to ask to see your member of Congress. But if you don't end up seeing the member, if the members are busy, if they're voting or they're in the middle of something, and you only end up seeing staff, please know that that is still a very valuable experience. And in some ways, you know, ultimately you do hope to spend some time with staff because they're going to be more likely to take notes, know the ins and the outs of the issue well, and they really do have the ear of the senators. So don't be or the congressman or woman. So don't be disappointed if you speak with a staffer and you don't get to meet with your member themselves. But if you do get to meet with the member, chances are it's going to be a short meeting. So you want to be thinking, you know, if I have 2 minutes, what do I want to use those 2 minutes to say to my member versus the longer period of time that you will have in a meeting with a staffer. Okay, so what to talk about is the next question. We do have 4 issue areas that we suggest you consider talking about. Now, this doesn't mean you have to talk about all of them. It doesn't mean that you have to be an expert at any of them. We will have materials that the staff can look at that you can leave behind, so don't feel any pressure to be an expert. But we will just talk a little bit about those issues in a minute. What's most important, and that where we know you are going to make the most impact and difference, is talking about your story, about the people that you work with. That you are an expert at, and that's frankly what matters most. When we talk about how to do these meetings with members of Congress and Hill staff. I like to think of it in terms of heads, hearts, and hands. Excuse me. And that is when we talk about heads, we want to have some sort of hard statistic, some piece of research, some fact about our program that we can share with the member or their staff that's going to stick. Now, this does not mean rattling off a huge list of statistics. You're going to lose them, just like I would lose you, hopefully, if I spent the whole time giving you statistics. But you do want to have at least one or two key pieces. Then after that, the heart piece is to tell a story. Think about what really drew you to intergenerational work. What is your experience, your story, or something that happened the other day in one of the programs with one of the kids or older adults that you work with that just said, this is the reason that I'm in this. This is what's transforming these kids' lives. Think about, or this older adult's life, think about those stories and put it together in a way that you can communicate it relatively quickly, but a way that the heart is really in it, so that that staff member is going to have an image that will stick with them when they're making decisions about investments. So spend some time really constructing that story now so that you're comfortable with it and prepared to share it in that meeting. And I'm going to talk about some issues, and if you can make a connection between your story and these issues, that's ideal. But if you don't feel like an expert on these policy issues and you don't feel like you can do that, that's okay, because it's part of that member's responsibility to make a connection with your program. What can we do to make more of this happen around the country? That's part of their responsibility. We're going to try to help make those connections, but conveying your story is the most important piece. Okay. So I'm going to move into the issues a bit now. We are really looking at 4 areas that we suggest you consider talking about. One is Social Security. Of course, you hear a lot about Social Security. Most people are familiar with what the program does. But usually, when you hear about it in the media, and frankly, often the way that it's talked about on Capitol Hill, is Social Security is a program, is a retirement program. It's a program for older people. Certainly it is. It's a very critical program in terms of supporting people in their older years. But we always want to make sure that when Congress is talking about Social Security and potential changes to the program, that there's a recognition and a realization that it's an intergenerational program, and that more than 6.5 million children receive Social Security as part of their family income. It's also a very critical piece of economic security for children in grandfamilies, families where grandparents are raising grandchildren. And so we want to make sure the message here is that Social Security should be strengthened, not cut. Now, we're not naive to think that no cuts need to, or no, excuse me, we're not so naive to think that no changes need to be made to the program. But the message here is that changes need to be made in a way that strengthens the program, not that, not in the context of deficit reduction, because Social Security itself feeds into itself and can be balanced with a few minor adjustments. So if you're interested in getting into the specifics of those adjustments, I have a website here that has a number of recommendations about how to change the program in a way that will protect the needs of children and seniors. One specific change is raising the cap on Social Security income that can be taxed. So at a certain point, wealthier individuals stop being taxed at their Social Security income, and we're just suggesting that they could continue to be taxed on their Social Security income. So that's one recommendation that actually a lot of folks agree on, but it's not moving because there's a lot of disagreement on other changes to the program. So again, if you want more information, we suggest you visit www.nasi.org. That's the National Academy of Social Insurance. And you can direct your members of Congress to that too if they ask what's a good source of information on changes to the program. Next, we're going to talk about sequestration in the budget. So I imagine that by now folks have heard the term sequestration. What does it mean? You'll see that there's a link here in this presentation, and we can send this to you after the presentation is over as well, so you can take a look at it. Unfortunately, we're not able to actually show, this is a link to a video, and we can't actually show you a video through the webinar because it would stop and start and not come out well, but we'll send you a link to this presentation afterwards, and it talks a little bit about the cuts from sequestration and what they mean. Sequestration, of course, is across-the-board cuts that have been imposed because Congress couldn't come together in agreement about ways to address our current budget issues. And so just to give you a sense about what they mean, if you imagine, and the video will go into this quite clearly, but if you imagine a full circle, a full pie, and you take about 2/3 of that pie, 2/3 of the money in our whole federal budget is for what's called mandatory spending. That's programs like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, unemployment insurance. Some of those programs that anybody that qualifies, that meets a certain set of eligibility requirements, must, by law, get the support that they need. The other 1/3 of the budget is what we call discretionary money, and that is money that Congress decides how much to give to a given program every year. So it doesn't mean that it automatically goes every year. It doesn't happen unless Congress decides to give a certain amount of money to a program. So that's 1/3 of the budget. Now, of that 1/3, a half is for defense programs. The other half is for a lot of other programs, most of which are the programs that probably support some of the work that you do. It's things like education, safety, child care, senior nutrition, WIC, food and drug safety, and a lot of the innovation programs that often support opportunities for intergenerational programming. So the message here is that cuts to non-defense discretionary programs through the sequester are impacting children, youth, and older adults. They're taking a very disproportionate amount of the cuts, and if you know how these cuts are affecting the people in your community, it would be good to illustrate them here. And so the message is that Congress really needs to find a balanced solution that protects vital programs that children and older adults rely on. So we need to be looking at solutions that look at how to generate more revenue, how to strengthen the economy, not just looking at ways to cut programs that are out there. Next, the Older Americans Act. The Older Americans Act is the big piece of legislation that authorizes a number of programs for older people in this country. Pretty much most of the programs other than Social Security and Medicare that are targeted towards older adults come through the Older Americans Act. There's just a new bill reintroduced to reauthorize this program. Reauthorizing means they take a look at all of the eligibility requirements, the way that the program is set up. They do that every 5 years and make decisions about how to change it. So we're overdue. It was supposed to happen earlier this year. It hasn't happened. So Congress is taking a look at it now. Now, the Older Americans Act has a number of intergenerational provisions. New in this new bill that's being proposed is language to encourage more multi-generational centers and intergenerational shared sites in multi-purpose senior centers. So that's a piece that we advocated for. It's in one of the bills that's out there from Senator Sanders, and we want it to stay in there. So we encourage you to just mention this piece. It could actually promote more shared sites. And then in addition to that, for those that are interested in supports for grand families, within the Older Americans Act is the National Family Caregiver Support Program, and that includes an allowance for states to use some of that money to serve grand families up to 10%, and we are just looking for ways to encourage more states to use that money since it is an option. so we encourage incentives in that program to use that money for grandparents raising grandchildren. And finally, the last one on the topic of grandparents raising grandchildren is about Fostering Connections grants. We are at the 5-year anniversary of the Fostering Connections to Success and Increasing Adoptions Act of 2008, which is some major child welfare legislation that passed about 5 years ago. It was the largest child welfare legislation to pass within a decade from that point. And it included a number of supports for grandfamilies. And part of that was $15 million for Family Connection grants. Those are competitive grants that asked groups to do a number of things to help grandfamilies. And one of the categories was Kinship Navigators programs, programs to help direct grandfamilies to services available in their community that they might need. We're getting very good results preliminary from those programs that were funded under this law, but the funding for those grants is coming to an end. It actually only went through 2013, and so now we're asking that that funding gets extended so that they're authorized from 2014 to 2016, another 3 years. That extended authorization is in the President's budget, but that doesn't mean Congress will make it a reality. So we are asking that that happen. Okay, so those are the topics. Real quick, what does a visit actually look like when you get there? So we talked about, what do you bring, a little bit about what you expect. You'll be going through security. Once you find your location, you get to the office you're looking for, you will want to, at least on your way there or before you head over there, be thinking a little bit of, become familiar with who's in your group. You might be grouped if you're on a Senate visit in particular and there's other folks from your state. Jessica may have grouped you together in a visit. So know who's in your group and make a decision about sort of who's going to start the meeting or be the leader. And when you get into the office, first of all, one thing to not be surprised if it happens is that sometimes when you're in Senate or House offices, their personal staff can at times be quite young. So particularly the people in the summer that will be greeting you at the front desk can be much younger interns, so don't be caught off guard by that. We have some of the brightest and most wonderful people here, and we know how much you value the input of young people since you do intergenerational programming. But that's one thing. You may have a more experienced staffer, or you may have a younger individual that you're meeting with. You want to spend some time doing some introductions of who is in your group, and then just talk a little bit about what you plan for the meeting. So, I'm here with this program. I'm part of Generations United Conference. We have particular interest in solutions that engage older and younger people together. Then talk a little bit about your program, why it's important to you. This is where you do your head, heart, and hands. So maybe if you have one statistic or key piece of information, and then tell a quick story. And then the hand is hand them a solution. So make your ask. We will have materials. If you are comfortable talking about some of the issues in their materials, you can do it there and make the specific ask that is laid out in the materials that we give you. Then feel free to leave those materials behind. We'll give you enough for each meeting. Thank them for the meeting. And then when you leave, have a quick talk with your group about what's your follow-up going to be. Are there certain things that they asked for that you need to send afterwards? Who's going to send the thank you and how. So make a quick plan so that that's coordinated. And that's your meeting. The one other piece that I'll say is that they might meet with you right there in the lobby. They might take you to a separate room. They might take you down the hall. Sometimes space is limited, so don't be surprised if your meeting quarters isn't exactly what you had envisioned. Adapt and have your meeting because they do want to spend that time listening to what you have to say. So from there, I think we're going to go to Jessica, who's going to talk about next steps and how to actually schedule your meeting.
Okay, so now that you know what your visit will look like and what you are going to potentially talk about in your visit, you actually have to make that time to schedule it. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is how to schedule your visit. Obviously, you can't schedule a visit until you know who your members of Congress are, and the easiest way we suggest finding out that information would just be going to www.contactingthecongress.org. When you go to that website, you will see a box that allows you to type in your zip code. You'll type in your zip code, and then the names of your representatives will come up, and you'll be able to get that information from them there. So after you have that information, you'll want to make sure that you are writing down their Washington office number. They'll have a Washington number, and they'll have the number to the office that's actually in their state or district. So make sure that you are calling their Washington office, and that, like I said, will be listed on that website. You will contact them. One of the staffers will answer, and you will want to ask to speak with the scheduler to schedule an appointment with your member. So we have a little script up there, what you might want to say. You know, hello, my name is such and such. I will be in Washington on Wednesday, July 31st for the Generations United Capitol Hill Day. I would like to meet directly with whoever your member of Congress is to talk with him or her about legislation that's important to me and other members of my community. Can you tell me a preferred method of submitting this meeting request in your office? So submitting the scheduling request depends on, you know, the office. You may speak directly to a scheduler. That would obviously be ideal. However, you might get a voicemail, or the voicemail may have instructions to say, you know, we need you to write an email, we need you to send a fax, we need you to call back. So just make sure that you're following whatever instructions the office actually gives, because they're actually all different. But it is always good, no matter how you're submitting your request, whether it's email, phone, or fax, to send a follow-up with them once you actually have your visit time, so that you can confirm that again. And make sure that that doesn't get lost, because I'm sure they're scheduling a lot of different things, so we want to make sure that when you get there, you actually have a confirmed reservation. And then finally, once you actually have your visit time scheduled, I would appreciate it if you could email me that information. Like Jaya mentioned earlier, especially for Senate, if we're going together, we might have different groups, so we can have one of the Generations United staff go with some different people, or take groups together. So it's really helpful for me if you just send me a quick email with the name of the person you're meeting with, the meeting time, and then I will put all that information together. Obviously, we encourage you to make those visits, schedule those visits on your own. However, we know that this can be a new experience for some people. Maybe, you know, you're nervous about it. That's totally fine. Also, you can just contact me, and if you want, we can schedule that visit together, and that's no problem. So my contact information is on there. If you want to email me and just say, you know, can you help me schedule that visit, then I'm more than happy to do that. So after you have scheduled and after you've sent me that information, some good tips to use before you come are making sure that your member, you're looking into your member's web page for any updates on issues that he or she is working on when you're planning the visit. So that's just good to see if there's any area of interest that they are, you know, working on, if they have any connections with what you're interested in. The members will have a Twitter or a Facebook, so you can go on there And that's just things to do right before your actual visit. So maybe you find a connection piece between them and you that you can bring up, and it's just good to know what initiatives they support. And then additionally, you'll want to, again, make sure that you're bringing materials from your organization, something that you can leave with them, and we'll also be giving you things to leave behind. So with that, we're going to move on to the question and answer section. If you have a question, you can submit that now if you haven't already, and we will just be going through those. And if for some reason you think of something after this, you can always email us and we can get you that information.
Great. Thank you, Jessica. So we are ready for question and answer, and we do have a couple of questions that have come in, so I will walk through them, and feel free to continue to submit questions if they come up. The first question is, do you have a preference between meetings in the House or the Senate? We actually encourage you to try to meet with all of your delegation, all of your representation. So of course you all have 2 senators and 1 House member, so we encourage you to try to do all. If you don't have time, we don't have a preference. It's all important. If you are particularly interested in speaking on one of the issues versus other issues, we can talk to you individually about, sort of where things are at with that particular issue, and whether or not speaking to your Senate member might be more timely versus a House member if you only have the opportunity to speak with one. But it's a little bit hard to know that right now, because your meeting time is still 5 weeks away. So sort of where different issues are, we're not really going to have a good sense of that until we get closer. But if you find yourself needing to make a decision, a couple days out, we can talk to you a little bit about that. But right now, we just encourage you to try to meet with both of your senators and with your House member if you can. There should be time in that time slot to hit all the offices. And it may be that you reach out to all of them and you only get through to some of them. So we encourage you to try to connect with everyone. Another question: if you're going to says, if you're going to an office alone and have the opportunity to meet with the congressman or woman rather than the staff, how long should I plan for the visit? It's a great question. We generally suggest that you plan on these visits being about a half an hour. Now, if you are meeting with a senator from your state, it's unusual, certainly, to spend a half an hour with a senator. That said, it completely depends on the senator and what state you're with. If you're meeting and what's going on that day and who you are. If you're meeting with a senator from, say, Maryland or Virginia, they get a lot of constituents that come to them in person in Washington because they're close by. So, it might be a little trickier, and they might have less time to spend with you. We recently had some folks come here from Mississippi, and Senator Cochran sat down with them for 20 minutes because it's very unusual for him to have constituents come here all the way from his state, which is further away. So it's difficult to say. Certainly, House members, if you're actually from within their district, there's fewer people from within their district in most cases, unless you're from a state that only has 1 House member and 2 senators, but you're usually more likely to have a longer period of time with your House member than your senator. So there's no sort of one answer to that question, but I would plan on a half an hour. If you end up taking longer than that, that's terrific, and you'll work that out with your schedule. But I would plan on a half an hour and expect that it would probably be shorter than that. Next question: has Generations United taken a position on the various options for modifying Social Security as presented in your earlier presentation? If you're interested in the details of our position, you certainly can look at our public policy agenda, which is linked in your Hill Day packet, and it is also available from our website. Our primary role around Social Security is to communicate the fact that Social Security is a program that serves all generations. We don't consider ourselves to be Social Security experts in terms of, getting into the change CPI and details around raising the retirement age and all of those pieces. We really see that it's important that when Congress is considering changes, that they recognize that it's not just a program that serves older people, but there's also a very important element of the Social Security disability and the Social Security Survivors Program that need to be considered. I did mention raising the cap. That's something that we have signed on in support of. So if that's certainly a piece that I've highlighted. That's a recommendation that we support, that I suggested you could talk about, raising the cap on the level after which, wealthier folks could continue to be taxed on their Social Security income. Beyond that, if you're interested in details, I would recommend that you go ahead and look at our public policy agenda, and you'll see that we don't take a stance on a number of specific recommendations, but we do encourage you to visit the National Academy of Social Insurance, which tends to be very in line with recognizing and protecting the needs of older adults and children in any reforms made to Social Security to strengthen it. Let's see, do we have any other questions? Here we have another one just came through. I'm presenting with a group. Does every member of our program need to schedule an appointment with our Congress or representative individually, or do we only need to schedule one appointment? Great question. Certainly we would encourage groups to go on visits together, particularly because you're talking on the same topic, and this is part of or on similar topics, and it's not always easy to get meetings with your members, so we encourage those meetings to be scheduled together, and that's part of Jessica's role. If you know other people from your district or state, then we encourage you just to talk to each other and make that happen. But if you're not sure if there's somebody else from your area, you can always connect with Jessica, and she'll help to make those connections a reality. Certainly with Senate visits, we do this a lot. We learn of one person who's worked on scheduling a Senate visit, and then if we hear about somebody else working on it, we just sort of loop you into the same visit together if you're comfortable with that. House visits, it's less common that people that don't know each other would be both scheduling one visit with a House member. So coordinate with people you know, and then if we identify two folks from the same district that don't know each other, we will try to help make that connection. All right, and another question just came in saying they joined late. Sorry if we addressed this. Will you email or post this webinar so we can have information in front of us as we prepare? Also, where is the Hill Day packet? Okay. When you signed up for the Intergenerational Legislative Advocacy session, you should have been looped in to get the Hill Day packet. But I'm glad you raised this because it is time that we put it up on our website. We can put it up, a link on our website, because I don't think we've done that yet with the updated packet. So we will do that. And in the follow-up from this webinar, we can make sure that we send you either a link or reattach that Hill Day packet, because folks that learned about this webinar should have received an attachment with the Hill Day packet.
But if you contact me again, then I can definitely get that to you. If for some reason it didn't go through or something like that, then we can re-get you that information. Right. And the webinar will be posted in a few days. So if you need to distribute that to other people or rewatch it, that will be possible.
Yes. There is a link. We could probably make it a news item, a link off of our homepage to the webinar. But again, if you have trouble accessing it, feel free to contact Jessica at jsmith@gu.org. Other questions? I got to thank you for that, so that's terrific. Do we have any other questions? We have about 10 minutes, but we're also very comfortable ending early if you'd like. Okay, one other question is just sort of how are the staff and the members that you meet with? How responsive are they? Are they friendly? Are they not friendly? Of course, that's another question that varies a great deal. Certainly, it's the responsibility of staff that you meet with to listen to you, to make note of what you're saying, and communicate that to the member of Congress. For the most part, on the whole, we found that staff are engaged. They're at least taking notes, are friendly. They're often from your district or from your state, so they're excited to see people in Washington from their home state or hometown. So that's fun. There are, at times, some that may be more resistant. So if you're going into an office that maybe comes from a different perspective than the one that you're presenting, that isn't supportive of your programs, you might feel that. But typically they would say, you know, my boss or my member takes a different stand on this issue, but I'm happy to hear your perspective and make note of it. Sometimes they might push back and just give you information about why they're coming from a different perspective, and if that happens, you should just take note of it, and you can always think through more about how to respond and follow up with an email or a phone call or some other type of communication. And this raises another question that hasn't come up here yet, but usually does, and that is, what if you get a question in your meeting about an issue you're talking about, or some question that you don't know the answer to? What do you do? Well, I'll start with saying what you don't do, and that is to make up an answer if you don't know if it's true. That's never helpful, because that, of course, would put you in a position where that staffer would perhaps ultimately find out the real answer and think that they're not necessarily convinced that the information, any of the information you have offered, can be trusted. So what you want to do is simply say, that's a great question. I don't know the answer to that, but I would be happy to get back to you. And there's two things about that. One is you're being honest, and you can always research that information and get back to them. But the other thing that's kind of a bonus about that is that means you actually have an excuse to get in front of them again. So they've asked for something, and you're following up, and it means that you've got sort of two touches with them. You have their in-person contact, and then you have another opportunity to get back with them to get your issue in front of them again. So you can think of it in a very positive way. Don't feel bad if you don't know the answer to questions that they ask. That happens all the time, including to, you know, professional lobbyists. That's not uncommon. So with that, I think I don't see any other questions coming through. From here, you know, Jessica is available to you as you're scheduling your meetings, and if questions come up, you should feel free to connect with her or me. Her contact information, which I mentioned earlier, is on the screen. We'll make sure that you can connect with that Hill Day packet if you don't have it already. We also encourage you to spend some time, once you've found out who your legislator is, if you don't know that already, looking at their website, becoming familiar with who they are. We also ask, if you, hopefully you are by this point, but if you haven't already signed up to get Generations United e-alerts, you should feel free to do that. We do have policy alerts, but we've moved to the majority of our policy information just being integrated into part of our Generations This Week, which is our weekly electronic newsletter. So if you sign up for that, you should be getting alerts related to policy topics. And again, a reminder, if you go to contactingthecongress.org, you can find information about your legislator's contact information. So those are some of your next steps, and please do be in touch with Jessica about what progress you make on scheduling your visits. And again, here is the email for both myself and for Jessica if questions come up, and the main phone number here at Generations United if you prefer to talk by phone versus email. We're happy to help you through the process. So
thank you so much. I look forward to talking to you in the future. Don't hesitate to call or email. If you have any questions, I will be updating you with notifications and anything that comes to our attention that I feel like you should know about. So be looking for my emails in the weeks to come.
Thanks a lot. We look forward to seeing you all in July. Bye-bye.